What do you look for in an RPG hero? Do you want a character who strives for vengeance, or one that's more down to earth? What if I told you that you could kind of have both? Well, at least that's what Arco attempts to balance. Published by Panic and developed by a 4-person team, Arco is a low fantasy RPG that uses a Mexican folklore-inspired backdrop for a story that balances vengeance, personal growth, and intercultural connection. It's a unique premise that you don't often see in RPGs. In today's review, let's see if Arco becomes your indie folk hero game, or is a story better left to ruins. As always, if you're enjoying our content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. You can also support us on Patreon and join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays on both YouTube or Twitch for our live streams. Each act of Arco's story has you controlling interconnected characters in its overarching world, albeit ones that do bring their own perspective to the story through cultural diversity. The narrative begins with the native peoples of a land being colonized by a group known as the Newcomers. In particular, a gang of these newcomers known as the Red Company have been terrorizing and slaughtering these natives. The result is social, spiritual, and even political divides among each tribe as they attempt to survive and practice their local religion. The developers make it known from the beginning that this is a story of vengeance. Each character we inhabit has a personal vendetta against the Red Company, each seeking to see the gang ended. Each character is controlled across several acts in various regions, ranging from prairies to mountains and deserts to rainforests. Along the way, choices will be made that can drastically affect the story, albeit ones not always obvious in their influence, even so far as side quests that can impact the story if not completed. While Arco's story is mainly about vengeance, the devs inject some levity to avoid doom and gloom. In fact, the story plays out more as a folktale, giving off the sense that you're hearing about a local legend. It's hectic and violent, but with the right doses of moral ambiguity and comic relief to keep things calm rather than overwhelming. And this is a huge contrast to other RPGs that tend to rely on depressing or emotionally charged story beats. Dialogue in the game is pretty short and concise, which I actually enjoyed. It's not that I don't like long-form dialogue in RPGs, but sometimes you kind of want to get straight to the point. Arco takes you where you need to be, getting to that point without any fluff. This adds to the feeling of constant progression and not really running into inflated playtime. In line with the low fantasy setting, you are placed in a world with fantastical elements like elf-like creatures, large bugs, and mysterious magical elements. But this all exists in a more realistic world that tends to intrude on the more true-to-life aspects that the world's built out. In fact, most of the time, you're going to be fighting other humans rather than large monsters. The bulk of Arco's gameplay is centered on its frequent combat encounters. These aren't long nor unexpected, and some are even avoidable depending on your dialogue choices. Combat is turn-based, but not in the same way as many other RPGs. Instead, you'll make choices of an action, whether that be move, use an ability, or attack. And then when you end your turn, all actions happen at the same time without separate enemy phases. You can hold items in pouches to bring with you to a battle, and these can be used as free actions without ending your turn. There are separate abilities that are more akin to spells, though they're not really described with overtly magical terms. The resources to use these abilities is called Magi, which you'll gain 1 point of when you move in a turn and gain 3 points of if you choose to wait a turn. Some items and environmental events will also give you Magi. When taking your turn, you can hover over enemies and see the trajectory of their movement or plans of attack. This helps you plan strategically and gets you in the best position to get the enemy right in your line of fire. You'll be running around the battlefield a lot to dodge attacks. Most of the time you'll be fighting against many enemies alone, so running away and getting into a better position is sort of a must. This takes some time to get used to, having to balance out dodging melee attacks at the same time as bullets are coming at you. But luckily the learning curve is pretty low, and eventually you'll feel like a badass as you pivot around enemies while matrix dodging a slew of bullets. At points in combat, you're gonna have ghosts of guilt spawn on the battlefield and try to attack you. Choices you make throughout the game will add guilt and increase the ghost spawn rate. They're slow, pretty easy to avoid, and eventually go away after certain actions are taken in battle, though they have the ability to move while you are making an action choice, and this can actually affect your strategy overall. For the most part, combat, dialogue choices, and the occasional side quests will help forward the story. You travel around using a map which takes you to small side-scrolling segments filled with minor exploration, resource collection, or NPC dialogue, and traversal will also be requiring some backtracking from point to point. You may collect an item like a shovel and think it's just a weapon until you find its apparent second use, like digging a hole in a dungeon to reveal a hidden boss or some treasure. Sometimes you'll come across one-ways on the map, which are essentially points of no return. So any side quests or hidden objectives that you didn't complete before are now going to be lost to the void. Your fate is sealed. Continue the story that you have forged. Or you can save scum, which I actually tried to do, but I found it less satisfying than just owning my actions. Arco can be pretty tricky. You don't come across money often, yet there are shops aplenty. I'll occasionally need some health items but can't buy them, which pushes me to explore around and find these items in the map instead. When you level up, you'll mainly gain new abilities which will increase attack power and range. In order to get health or magi stat buffs, you'll need to choose a separate upgrade using experience points, effectively making you choose between stat buffs or a usable ability. Luckily though, you'll be gaining experience after every battle and even after some dialogue options, so you won't really ever feel underleveled, though even if you were underleveled, I think you could get through these battles. Even in some of the hardest fights where I had no healing items and I was at 1 health, I still managed to win by strategizing better and better after each attempt. Gameplay is very accessible in that you don't have a lot of stats demanding your attention. You have mainly experience, health, and magi. Character skills are also very well described and in a concise manner. Though, while the game is accessible and has a pretty low learning and difficulty curve, the mechanics and systems at play I find to be pretty deep and fun enough for even more hardcore RPG players. Though the game is polished, there are some awkward gameplay quirks. You can get other NPCs in your party at some points, but they don't stick around long enough, and some of them don't even help you in battle. Some aspects of the game are also not well described, such as these various shrines that you can make offerings at throughout the map. And one notable example of a flaw in the game's script was when I would come across an overworld action like collecting water or killing a certain NPC, and then the game would either spoil something I haven't come across yet, or a character that was no longer in my party would congratulate me for killing an enemy. This isn't game breaking, it's pretty minor, but it does break immersion. Overall, the folksy Latin American and Native American inspired music was quite good. The metal music is epic sound rock ballads, and the overworld music feels pretty calm, which is welcomed after each combat encounter. I feel as though Arco's pixelated graphics will be a point of contention for some players. In battles, there's more detail that makes the game look similar in art style to something like Hyper Light Drifter, but the overworld can sometimes look under-detailed, mainly in the characters. Some characters are made of what looks like only 4 or 5 pixels, which can make these areas feel generic or unpopulated and really leave you wanting. Now, I personally didn't have a problem with this, as I felt the focus was mostly on the well-detailed surroundings. One of Arco's more clever aspects is how the devs use symbols for visual representation. While words are obviously used in dialogue, most overworld events and combat actions are denoted by simple symbols which are very easily understood and also enhance accessibility. Overall, Arco shows players a world ripe with violence and strife, though through different perspectives from those being directly affected. It tells us that there can be a calm with the storm. The story is incredibly emotional at points, but can also be painful and playful. The unique gameplay style engrosses you by requiring snappy decisions, whether that be in battle or out. The gameplay is pretty short, at about 10 hours. Plus, the hidden side objectives make for great replayability, and while it wasn't a negative for me personally, Personally, I do think some people can be turned off by the art direction. However, the gameplay, story, and accessibility really elevate Arco to be a game that's well deserving of a playthrough. I'm awarding Arco the Silver Genie Lamp of approval.